Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. My name is Cody Sizemore and I'm joined here by my lovely co-host, Maria Casillas. And today we're going to be talking about something that actually came up in one of our monthly coaches meetups. A little bit of a case study. We're not going to go too far into the nitty-gritty details, but I do think that it's a good topic. And honestly, it's something that I've even experienced in my coaching practice as well. So definitely going to be a juicy one. That's for sure. Juicy. And you know what? You're probably listening to this and you're like, coaches meetup? What are you talking about? Well, if you don't know that we have a coaching meetup, that's probably because you're not part of our Facebook group. So if you're not a part of our Facebook group, you can totally join that for free. And then you can be a part of that coaches meetup on a monthly basis for free as well. So if you want to join all of that and get all the information, everything like that, you can simply join the Facebook group. It's called the Financial Coaches Community by New Money Habits. So, join in there, look for the announcements of when those meetups are happening, say hi, ask questions, whatever it might be. We'd really love to see you on the next one. And we also just want to take a moment here and just say, hey, if this is your first time listening, welcome in. We appreciate you. And if you like the episode of this show, feel free to go back and listen to all the other episodes that we have done before. There's a lot of really good golden nuggets within those. And also, if you don't mind, if you feel like being like super, super cool and really, really nice, just go ahead and, leave a rating on our show, leave a review on our show, share our show with another coach that you think might get some value from it. We don't run any sort of ads. We don't get paid for this. So that kind of like organic push is a really important thing to us. And for those of you who have been listening for weeks and weeks and weeks, we want to say a special thank you to you because we call you guys our every weekers. And you guys are the ones who really keep this show going. So we really appreciate your continued support today, every week that's passed, and every week that's going forward. So that being said, Maria, how you doing? And what are we talking about today?
Well, you've already shared a little bit about what we talked about today. I'm doing okay. This is the onset of allergy season over here, so you might hear some sniffles in the background. But no, it's 100 and some degrees here right now, and
It's
and
26 here.
It's what?
26.
Oh my gosh. It is really crazy how truly bipolar our weather is right now. And just for the record, those of you who are listening for the first time, I am in Arizona and Cody's in Ohio. But what's crazy is that it's like 16 degrees higher than normal right now over here. So it's not typically this warm this early, but it has made all of the spring stuff happen. So this is when the snakes come out and the scorpions come out and all of the blooms come out. And so, yeah, it's just been a little bit of an allergy mayhem over here for the last week. And I have a feeling over the next few weeks, this is what I'm going to sound like. So I apologize ahead of time for that. I would really am excited to talk a little bit about this particular topic, Cody, with you, because it's something that is coming up in our meetup, as you mentioned. So that means that it's not just something that's going on in our practices, it's something that is happening in our community as well. And we had a really great opportunity to help this coach truly unpack some of what was going on. And in the interest of not misquoting and missharing, but also in the interest of privacy, we're not going to dig into a lot of the details. We'll definitely talk around the edges a little bit. But there were some really interesting things that came out of this particular conversation. And so I'm hoping that you and I can just kind of, unpack it a little bit here for our audience.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Cool. So the very basis of the question, and I admittedly jumped into the conversation a little bit late because I had a sick daughter, and I had to clean up after her. So I jumped into the meetup late. But upon getting in there, they said, I think your ears were ringing because we were just talking about how we wanted your input specifically on this topic. And so I don't know a ton of the background, but I will say that the gist of it is I have a client who is continuing to show up and continuing to pay, but I don't know that I'm giving them the value that they need. And so at what point do I decide to just not fire the client necessarily, like you and I've talked about before, Cody, but more along the lines of tell him that I can't in good conscience take his money anymore is really kind of
Mm.
what this individual is saying. And so, of course, it started with me just sort of catching up a little bit on, well, tell me a little bit about who the client is. How long have you been working with him? What were some of his goals to start, et cetera? And the short version, Cody, is that he's been working with him for at least a year. He's shown up every single time, and that some of his initial goals were similar to what a lot of your ideal clients are. Get out of debt, build up some savings, and I think one of the emotional ones was more along the lines of spending more time with his family. He
Okay.
is a vet, I believe.
Okay.
Um, and I don't know if there was any other information that's super important, but that was kind of the background that I was given to begin with. Anything that you have questions about that yet?
No, everything
No.
sounds good
Okay.
so far.
All right. So the basis of the question is, this guy has been showing up over and over and over, and he continues to look for my advice and to look for counsel. But I just don't see the needle moving anywhere. And so, of course, one of the things that we looked at was what is measurable versus immeasurable.
Right.
Um, you see where this is going.
Yeah.
Movement. And of course, the measurable movement was all of the things that this coach was really starting to look at, whether or not there was debt. In fact, he said not only had he not paid down debt, but his debt number had increased since he had started with him. The savings number, I don't admittedly remember whether that had increased, decreased, or stayed the same, but I don't think there was a lot of movement on that for him as well. And then with regard to his family, he did say that he was able to spend some more time with his family. So that was good. But it left this coach struggling with the idea of I'm not seeing that needle move in the correct direction. It's moving, but not in the right direction. So, where do I go with this?
Hmm. That's a yeah. That's a tricky situation. Tricky
One
situation.
that you've also had, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had similar thoughts in ways, right?
Hmm.
I want to first just acknowledge the coach because obviously he's bringing this up because his heart's in the right place.
Yeah.
Like he really wants to ensure that like if someone is going to pay him, that the work that he does is going to yield some sort of return on investment, right?
Hmm. Yep.
But I think that term return on investment is relative. Um, because in the eyes of a coach, and coaches oftentimes are very result driven and very analytical in certain ways.
Hmm.
When we're not seeing the debt go down, and in fact we're seeing it go up, and maybe the things are not being fully executed on that he's suggesting or coaching him through. I can understand the frustration around that. My question, though, would be, clearly he's been working with him for a year. So, actually, two questions. He's working with him for a year. So, at some point, there must have been some sort of results that happened. I would imagine. I mean, why would a coach work with someone for an entire year if there was never any results at all, kind of thing?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I don't know. Like I think that at some point there may have been like a couple of months where the coach saw things developing and saw things moving in a direction that was going to be good. And then maybe it started to drop off. And then there's probably a period of time where the coach was like, we can get back to that. We can get back to that. And then it just didn't happen, but they just kept meeting. And then it brought him to this point. Right. So that would be one question is like, was there any quote unquote results? in the coach's
Mhm.
eyes at any point.
Excuse me.
Um,
And that there very well might have been, and that might have been part of the conversation before I was able to jump in.
sure,
Um,
sure,
One of the things that I do explicitly remember is that there was, and I mentioned that he was a vet, and for some reason that came to mind, and I'm starting to remember why that came to mind, because it seemed as though there were some certain emotional issues that needed to be taken care of, and this coach was very savvy and said, I've encouraged him to go and get a counselor and to do these other things, but he has not done so. And so one of the questions that I had was, it was sort of, is this man similarly aged to you? Because in my mind, I was thinking maybe he's just sort of paying for a friend. Like I know that sounds kind of silly, but just the idea that he's willing to pay and he shows up every time because he's actually excited to engage in this conversation with the coach. And as it turned out, I think he said that he was actually quite his junior, so quite a bit younger than the coach. And so that theory kind of went out the window for me. But then later on in the conversation, I was curious about what his relationship was with his dad. And I even said, I know this sounds kind of crazy and maybe a little bit Freudian, but what is his relationship like with his dad? Is he trying to seek wise counsel through an older man in his life, and that one didn't really sit as super accurate, and that's totally fine. I was not pretending to know the answer, but just trying to dig around a little bit and just see like what is driving this individual to continue to come, because I don't know if there were months where there was a significant measurable um
yeah,
result for him. So it was actually a really interesting conversation all
yeah.
around. But
And
before you ask this question, I do want to
go
say,
ahead.
not only with this other individual seeking wise counsel, you gave kudos to the coach for coming to and bringing this to the community.
Yeah,
I want to just say that he is also seeking wise counsel in that particular instance as well, and I think that that is super super smart for
yeah,
somebody to do.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, the other thing I was gonna say too is that, like, you know, clearly this client is continuing to show up, and it sounds like at least when they're having the meetings, he's, like, dialed in, he's receptive. Um, it sounds like the in between the meetings,
Mhm.
things are not happening, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but most importantly, he's continuing to be willing, and not just willing, but sounds happy to make the investment month over month over month.
Yep.
So, you know, we look at things in that lens too, and it's like, okay, well, there is value in some way, shape, or form. And if maybe the coach isn't feeling it, the client is in one way or another. And apparently it's enough to continue to make that monthly investment. I don't know how much the investment is per month. I
Nor
don't
do
need
I.
to know. But the point is that like the person who he's serving is getting some sort of value. And that's
Mhm.
something to remember. Like you can't just discount that
Mhm. Mhm.
because that's a important part of this equation here. So
Yes. I agree. And I also can understand where the coach is coming from, where if he's giving value, but it's not a value that he feels comfortable continuing to give,
yeah,
then I can understand where somebody would say, hey, is it time for me to let this client know that maybe we're not aligned well, etc. And I think that that's ultimately what he ended up doing. Before he talked to us, he actually did have a conversation with this client about kind of just looking at the next couple of months to see, is it going to be a good match for the two of them? But I want to just talk a little bit about some of the ideas that came up for this coach, if we may, because this might be something that our listeners can kind of go, oh, all right, maybe we can look at some of this. So rather than just making a decision around whether or not to keep working with this client, one of the things that a couple of things that came up were sort of the behavioral pieces with
hmm
helping the client to sort of determine, why is he self-sabotaging as he is? Because clearly he enjoys doing this coaching with this individual. Maybe he really needed that counselor, but instead of going to a counselor, he's going to this financial coach because it's somebody that he really connects with. But what like if he's going to be working with a financial coach, then he also needs to be working towards financial goals, right?
Right.
So some of the stuff that came up was having him to sort of be aware of what he's thinking and feeling immediately before, during, and after some of these self sabotaging purchases and decisions that he's making. And one of the ideas was for him to journal. Uh, that was a good idea that was offered, but it was one of those that we said it's a good idea if he's the type who will journal.
Yeah,
And
that was my concern because like if he's already not doing the simple things,
yep,
he's not gonna journal.
yep, yep. That's kind of what came up. But we still wanted to have some level of understanding, of recognition of how things are connected to how he's thinking and feeling. And so we talked about maybe having just little scales. So rather than, having to sit out and write out pros, not like pros and cons, but literally pros in journal form, for him to just be able to have like a note that says, um, when it am I feeling stressed or am I feeling relaxed, right? And just on a scale of those, to just to be able to make a quick marker on some of that. And another community member chimed in and she was like, I do something similar to that, not just with my clients, but for myself as well. When I am making certain decisions, I've had to take a step back and ask myself, she's using the HALT method. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the HALT method.
Halt?
But you ask yourself if you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So when you're making these decisions that are maybe
Interesting.
self-sabotaging, you take a step back and ask yourself, am I in this moment either hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, or any variation of those different emotions? And is that affecting what I'm doing right now? And so that was just another really simple way to slow down, because if you're not going to journal, and you're not going to make a mark on something, maybe you can at least make a mental note for yourself. Is this something that is connected to how I'm feeling or behaving right now? And that way you can then see, are there patterns? And that's really what we were sort of letting the coach know, is that this individual, if he just collects that data for you, then you can be the one to sort of look for those patterns and see, like, when you are feeling this certain way, is that when you're making these decisions that are going absolutely against all of the things that you've said you wanted to do? And then you can sort of work backward and through some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that all of those are good things. I actually haven't heard of the HALT method, which
Okay.
it makes total sense. I think that uh, I've used that indirectly and unknowingly,
Yep.
um, in certain ways. Not
Hmm.
exactly those exact motions, but similar, right? So it's just cool to learn. Hey, like there's actually something out there called that. I still question: is he even going to do that?
Hmm.
You know.
Hmm.
Um, So, do you remember this was probably a couple months back? We had a conversation around um, helping clients, who are struggling to take action, struggling to, stay within their bounds in order to make that progress. And we talked about, basically one structure of, backloading your financial goals and
Hmm.
then doing the new structure of front loading the financial goals. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yep.
So that all actually came about because I had a client like this,
Hmm.
right? Um, so and that's actually helped quite quite a bit. Even over like the last couple of months I've met with that client, she has now for the second time that we've been working together become debt free. And then on top of that, for the first time ever, she now has 3,000 in her savings. Whereas before, I think that she said that the most that she ever had in savings in her entire life was $500. kind of
Mm,
thing. So
mhm.
so that's a big change. And the reason I brought up the whole like, well, maybe this person saw results at first and then it died off and you're just trying to get that back, and then there's that next phase to where it just never really came back. That all was because of this one client that I'm talking about, of my own
Right.
personal experience, right? So again, I don't know if this is a perfect fit for this scenario, but I do think that this scenario fits within this topic kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
so for the sake of the coach, assuming that he's listening right now and we don't wanna have to send him back to the other one, can you just sum up in 3 or 4 minutes what that switch was
yeah,
so that maybe he can try to apply that as well?
yeah. Essentially, like every time that someone gets paid, you essentially just map out like what's happening before the next time they get paid, um, and you ensure that they have enough money to cover the bills that are coming out. And then they have enough money to cover the variable or behavioral spending areas like groceries, fun money, gas that we have allotted for. And we ensure that they have enough to cover what they would need, kind of thing. And then
Mhm,
anything above that, you then just put it directly towards the financial goal on the day that they get paid instead of waiting towards the end of the month. Because if we wait, then that money just sits there. And as that money sits there, especially someone who has a spending problem or a follow through problem, they're going to find ways to allow that money to leave their account, kind of
yeah,
thing. So, for example, if someone gets paid a $3,000 paycheck and they have $2,000 of expenses and bills before the next time they get paid, well, then great, take $1,000 on the day they get paid and put it towards their debt. And then they're forced to work with what they have, which is
mhm,
$2,000 kind of thing.
mhm,
And I've made that shift with a number of clients, and making that shift has really, really helped almost force clients to have the results. Now, that is on the financial side of things. The mental and emotional is a completely different animal.
yeah.
But if we can at least solve one of the issues, then it has a higher likelihood of the other issue being more solvable as well, at least in
Yeah,
my opinion.
yep, I agree, and, in order for that to work though, that the client has to be willing to not go further into debt. Right. I mean, I would imagine that that would be one of the caveats as you're
Yeah,
working with your client. Not all clients. I'm just in order for so if you take the thought in your example, for example, for in your case, for example, if you took the $1,000 and put it towards the goal, whether that goal was to pay down debt or to increase savings or whatever, if that person was just hell bent on doing whatever they wanted to do, then technically they could just swipe a card for $500.
sure.
But in this case, you're saying this individual you're working with is not doing that, and so the other individual would also have to say, "I'm willing to not put this on a credit card," for example, and when we pay this $1,000, then I am forced to work with what I've got.
Sure. And if they're the type of client that is unwilling uh to stay out of debt, meaning that they're okay with going further into it,
Mhm.
um that's a vetting issue when you first brought on this client.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. That's a fair statement because I do know that at least I think I remember correctly that this individual does have more debt now than when he began, I
And
believe.
that might be circumstantial though. Like there may have
Yeah,
been a
that's
car
true.
breakdown, or um, maybe their water heater went out. There's a number of things that could go into that, unless if it is like a willingness, like they're
Mhm.
like just being careless and they're just swiping their card because they want to. Yeah, that's a separate issue kind of
Yeah,
thing. But
that's a
again,
big
it's hard to know
distinction.
without knowing more.
Yeah, and it's a great distinction, and I don't know more, so I don't want to pretend to,
Yeah.
and we won't surmise that we know. But if you are listening to this, to the coach who knows who he is, then that is actually really solid advice as well. And I'm actually kind of curious to find out whether or not because this was a couple weeks ago now, whether or not the client had made the decision to just continue to work with this coach, and if that decision was mutual.
Yeah. Yeah. But to answer the question, when do we decide to stop working with them? I think it's probably after you've exhausted all options. And if it's still not feeling right in your heart, you just let them know. And you say,
Yeah.
hey, here's what we need to do. I'm here to help you. I don't feel like I'm helping you. And then
Mhm.
they'll probably be like, no, you're helping. No, you're helping. It's like, great. But this needs to be a mutual relationship, you know? So here's what we're going to do. You're going to do X, Y, Z. And if we do it, great. Let's keep it going. But if we don't do it, it's okay. It's okay.
Mhm.
Like we've had a good run. I've really enjoyed the relationship that we've built. But I think that it would serve you to look at other options. And I
Mhm.
also think that it would serve myself as well. And just have a mutual part. Um, but I do think that you could call it giving them an ultimatum in certain ways. Um, I more so see it as just like a graceful warning, you know?
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, exhaust the options, see what works, see what doesn't work. If it works a little bit, stick with it and really pound it out to see if it continues to grow. But if you just keep hitting wall after wall after wall after wall, you know, give that graceful heads up. And then if it still doesn't happen, at least you did your part kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And one last thing I'll say about this is that I really appreciate that the coach not just, I mean, I said earlier that he sought out wise counsel, which is true, but I think in the attempt to exhaust all options, this coach recognized that there might be options he had not yet thought of and was willing to tap into the creativity of a community to see that before giving that graceful warning, the way that you so nicely put that. So I think it tells us a couple things. One, that there is a maturity and a wisdom that this coach has. And also, it just reminds us of the importance of community so that we can truly serve not just ourselves, right? Because we've talked oftentimes about how it can feel like we're on an island and nobody likes that. And so having the support is good. That's true and that's good. But it also serves our clients well when we have a community that we can go and kind of bounce ideas off of and really dig in to make sure that we are offering them all of that we have. And then we can say, I'm sorry, this isn't working out, rather than doing that prematurely.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And again, a really good way to find that community is through our Facebook group. So if you haven't joined yet, join, be a part of the meetups. We'll be happy to see you and happy to have you.
Sounds great.
So with all that being said, thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Financial Coaches Podcast. We will, of course, be back next week with another episode. So make sure that you chime in there, give us a follow, rate the show, whatever it might be. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Financial Coaches Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching.